Hi guys, welcome to an episode of QQ.
Salut.
Salut, yeah. This is Second Perspective. I'm Paul Weston.
I'm Torin McLaughlin, still.
And this is going to be a discussion. That means full of spoilers of Mad Max Fury Road. If you haven't heard our review or you haven't seen the film yet, go do so. It is definitely worth your time. Very quick sort of recap of the review. We both gave it A+, and we don't need to give you a synopsis because hopefully you've already seen the film. But yeah, why don't we?
Otherwise, what are you doing here, you spoiler-loving scumsuckers?
Usually, what we try and do in these discussions is sort of go from point A to point B, and so on and so forth. Torin and I both thought that the story was sort of really well executed and sort of went from its first necessary point to its second, and then so on and so forth to the end. And so we wanted just kind of had sort of a 15-minute kind of sort of stream of consciousness discussion about its themes. And so it won't be concentrating as much on the points that we usually do, largely because it just does. The thing that the film does so well is it takes all of its action sequences, though they are very cool, they all have a narrative purpose, and it's very clear of why they need to be there. And so it's to talk about that stuff, I feel like would be sort of besides the point because its story clarity is so good, and I think it's better to honor the film by just talking about some of the questions and themes that it leaves us with. So, Torin, why don't you start us off? I know that you said you want to talk about something in particular.
There are a few things in particular. I mean, apart from admiring the film for its set design and for the stunts and for the metalwork and fabrication and technical skill that went into building the trucks and all sorts of vehicles and mashing them together in different sort of genre-defying ways for car lovers. Like they'll see there's like a tank that's made out of it looks like a what is it? I don't know. A sweet car, an American muscle car, basically provides a frame, sits on top of a tank, and it's just so dope. And there's gratuitous machinery and gratuitous masculine high octane bullshit. Basically, they ride around the war boys and Immortal Joe. They ride around with like a guy who's playing guitar and like 4 drummers all the time. Like he actually has an amp stack that's like I don't know unreal. And they've got some monitors that are like 10 monitors high. It's pretty crazy.
Actually, bring up a brief point on that. Like, I forget the film term, so apparently I didn't pay attention enough in my film degree. But I really did enjoy how the film, though it took itself seriously, did every once in a while sort of wink at the audience, saying like, yeah, we're aware that action films and all that sort of stuff have or kind of crazy scores and all that sort of stuff, and so it to just kind of somehow fit. It's the fact that a guy with flames coming out of a guitar and having these amp stacks 8-10 feet high on top of a fast moving car is actually totally makes sense in this world, yet is also winking at us in terms of knowing that these scores are often sort of like an external factor on films, and this one it's an internal. It's just it shows a very sort of self-reflexive element to it, and it shows that it's just because it's an action film doesn't mean it's not intelligent.
No, absolutely, and I think that's a good way into this, because what you see on screen is like this guy with flame shooting out of his guitar, providing the soundtrack to the rest of the war boys, like chugging vehicles and that sort of thing, and the sound of the rock that they play is like not altogether different from the sounds of like a machine shop or something like that, right? It's like they've absolutely need this sort of fuel and this sort of environment to survive and thrive, so much so that they bring along and waste the gas and energy that it would take to power all this shit because they need some guy who's constantly playing a soundtrack for them. Like they need their own theme music to be portable with them, sort of thing, which is just like, I think it feeds right into the critique. Oh, sorry, I thought my phone was ringing. Oh my god, that's weird sound. It feeds right into the critique of sort of like hyper octane, hyper masculinity, where it's like the extension of man through mechanical means basically ad infinitum sort of thing, to the point where the war boys actually need to have their blood changed out, just like oil changes on vehicles, in order to live, and they've got a half-life. They deteriorate, like, chemically, because they've been, I don't know, irradiated by the earth or something like that. I don't know why exactly they need to have their blood changed, which I know that steroid users have to do, basically treating the body like a machine. And this is the type of culture that the movie critiques very heavily. I mean, at one point they've got actual human females, mothers, with big boobs being milked by big milk machines. And I heard people in the audience go, ew, gross, like actually have a moment of out loud revulsion in the theater, which doesn't happen that often. You get some movies where people actually clap and laugh and like cry out loud and stuff like that, but not actually that often. And it's funny because this is the sort of like agro-industrial thing that we do to cows, and that's part of what the movie wants us to think about, because it talks about basically scorched earth policy of government and war industrial complex basically consuming the earth to the point where we can't live in it anymore. And that's,
like it brings up part of the reason why the wives, I'm sorry, I don't actually remember the individual names, why part of they escape and that they leave a note. One of them is like,
right, yeah.
Our babies will not become warlords, but like the one behind, I think it's Mortan Joe actually. It says now, who killed the world then, right? And it's just it's kind of interesting how I think this is a really good example of, just because a character in a film is saying something, it doesn't mean that a filmmaker thinks that way. And so often people associate like, Quentin Tarantino, because he has all this violence in his films, he likes violence, right? I think with him, maybe he kind of finds it, interesting or whatever.
He does, yeah.
Right?
I've heard him say stately, like, "Oh, this is interesting. Violence is entertaining."
Right?
But
and like that's fine, you can think so, but like this is a really good film example that shows, and that's, it doesn't, just because a filmmaker shows something on screen and has particular, even the protagonists do something, doesn't necessarily mean that the filmmaker himself actually condones that behavior. And in fact, I think he's actually damning it in a sort of subtle but impactful way. I feel like some people are actually going to like come to the idea like, oh, I don't want my world like that. I it's cool and everything, but I really see the dark side of it. I'm not going to use plastic bags or like whatever. When like
good point, because that's sort of the takeaway that I think this film gestures towards, right?
Like it does that, but I feel like a lot of people are like, certain people are going to think, oh yeah, I came up with that all by myself, when I think it's just really good filmmaking that makes you think you came with it on your own, right?
Well, that's one place. The movie ends off basically where they come back, Imperator Furiosa comes back to the Citadel after going through hell, basically, and Mad Max pumping his own blood into her to save her life, and she comes back redeemed, and she redeems the citizens of the Citadel, basically, and everyone, the war boys, basically everybody who lives here, and is like a savior sort of figure. But there's really no indication as to how things will be broken down. Like, obviously there's going to be a change in the culture, and it's going to be a change that focuses on growing crops and like working the earth and that sort of thing, getting it arable again, so that they can sustain themselves not by means of oil and gas, and conserve water and that sort of thing, instead of just pouring it down like a skull fountain
mountain
to show people that you're the king of the world, and basically coming on all their faces, sort of thing,
like,
having them drink
as well. Like the thing that I thought was kind of interesting was like, there's a lot of films that are like, oh wow, this one was semi-successful, or at least did well in the box office. Let's make a second one. Like, I knew the end was coming very quickly, especially with just sort of like how the sound score was going, and how like certain characters died, and so on and so forth. But the whole time, I was sort of had a question in my head, like, are they even actually going to be able to salvage this civilization, right? And I think it actually sets it up for a decent sequel. And I believe I've read somewhere that there are going to be 3 more Mad Maxes.
Yeah, from like a sort of war siege standpoint, it makes sense that the Citadel will be attacked and they'll have to defend themselves.
Yeah,
it definitely makes sense.
And not only that, but just sort of internal torment and turmoil. Like, I don't believe that there's going to be like, you know, one or two quick things that they change, and all of a sudden the civilization is something to be envied, or people are suddenly going to be like normal again. I mean, like these are people that like inhale spray paint to like get a high, so they can go, yeah, I'm going to totally, you know, kill myself because I get reborn again, and like they believe this for whatever reason, right? Like it just basically says, like, it does a really good job of setting itself up for a sequel, whereas a lot of films of this sort of blockbuster kind of esque feeling don't, and then they just kind of scrounge up some sort of crappy second sort of sequel, right? So
Yeah. No, I think it, like, as sort of a ethical and political message at the end of the film, the fact that they don't give you any indication or show any sort of, like, obviously it would not work as a denouement to like show them peacefully working everything and like signing policy deals and that sort of thing, and like it wouldn't be very good filmmaking. But it points to the fact that you need to have a few strong ideals to make change, and basically the thing that they hold on to is the earth, making the earth workable again, and tenderness, sort of compassion for all that lives, because they sort of rehabilitate the one war boy who falls into, like, stows away with them, and they don't do it by, like, you know, scaring him into shape. Yeah. It's a little thinly scripted, actually, I think, at that point, because I think it would definitely take more to change his mind, if it were even changeable. Anyway, that could be a thin point in the storytelling, but because there's not that much dialogue, this film has to work quickly like that, and I don't think it's a big weakness at all. I think the important point is to show that, like, obviously conversion is possible. We need that sort of, like, conversion story built into this, I think. But it leaves you basically at the end with a bunch of dangling questions about how they're actually going to work out a new society, but the important thing is that they were able to affect change, like, based on a few fundamental principles, you know, and some, like, gunfire and gas and explosions, and that was necessary as well. Which
So why don't we talk a little bit? I feel like you'll probably be sort of more, not necessarily qualified, but just more informed on this. Why don't you talk about some of the female characters and sort of like how this film sort of, a lot of women's rights and feminists actually quite, like, they applaud this film because it's got a number of strong characters.
Well, I think that I read an article called "The Ecofeminism of Mad Max," and that's basically, I was just reciting that, so I have to cite that right now. But that's the perspective that I come out of to understand this. That's like my studies at university took me. It's like the basically intersectional approach to feminist politics says that all forms of oppression are interlinked, and that the oppression of women and the oppression of nature, the category of nature, and actually the literal destruction and consumption of the earth, without thinking in terms of an ecological, like, long perspective, like how are we going to be sustainable and that sort of thing. Basically, quick consumptive culture is tied to consumption of women and bodies and that sort of thing. So that these things are not separate, and I think the film comes straight out of that perspective and shows women being milked just like cows. You know, shows basically everything being sucked dry, the earth being sucked dry by a guy who stands over the populace of the Citadel and pours the water fountains and basically has all of his, you know, bounty gush onto their faces and that sort of thing, and then shuts it off. And he's got the power, the stop-go sort of power, and has gained it by warfare and intimidation and non-compassion. For even though he recognizes the value of water, it's sort of like from a power, a purely
economical
power thing, like I control it, you know. It's almost more symbolic than a literal need for him to assert his dominance. I don't know. So it's like a pretty scathing critique of male dominated society and the sort of like hyper masculine ooh, car go fast, like bomb go boom, gun get red hot, flames and that sort of thing to society. But to say that stuff is to be tongue in cheek, but this movie is like on the surface like that, and it does parody itself a little bit, or at least it parodies that culture pretty well. I think, like the guy with the guitar that shoots flames, we already talked about. In terms of like, so on the thematic level, I think the feminism is built into every second of the movie, right? But on the level of character, I think like if you take characteristic female tropes of a characteristic female or something, or like traits, characteristic female traits in writing that is bad for women and portrays women badly, is like women are the soft center and the emotive center and that sort of thing. But this film shows women being tough when they need to be and tender when they need to be, and it's actually the tenderness that I think is more valued. Obviously, they're tough by nature or by the fact of having to grow up in a tough environment and survive and that sort of thing. So I think it's like a combination of what are typically female and typically male characteristics in literature and in film and that sort of thing, and it's showing like a healthy balance of compassion with I don't know, toughness. It shows like basically well-rounded characters instead of having women stand up and fall down for fall over themselves for guys and just be objects of attraction and that sort of thing. It's got beautiful women at the center of the film, but they're just objects of lust for Immortal Joe, who also happened to be pretty skilled and tough when it comes to like battle scenarios and that sort of thing. So they sort of like prove themselves
I'm pretty sure that in most sequences, like the women save Max more than Max saves the women.
Yeah, exactly. And the like scene where Charlize Theron and Mad Max and Imperator Furiosa fight, neither gains the upper hand. They're just as tough as each other, sort of thing. And I think that there are more action movies now and more like sci-fi and like superhero movies that are starting to show women in roles like that have typically just been given to men de facto because men have bigger bodies and bigger muscles and that sort of thing, and that's supposed to be what we admire in men. But yeah, I mean, just by the simple fact of having women occupy those roles pretty much exclusively, like as the protagonists, there really aren't any women. There are no women antagonists in the film, I think.
Well, I think that probably reaches close to our 15-minute limit.
Yeah, that was probably over 15 minutes, so sorry about that.
No. Is there anything else that you want to bring up before we say goodbye to the internet?
I don't know, man. The internet has so many things going on that when we say goodbye...
It's a small echo in a gigantic canyon.
Right, we're a blip, man.
But hopefully it's a blip that you listen to. Thanks for listening, guys. Hopefully the shorter discussion will satisfy your Mad Max discussion needs. Hopefully Torin and I will watch a few more films while I'm actually visiting him in Kelowna. But yeah, we'll see you guys soon. We'll see you guys soon.
Soon very.
Take care, guys.